Last Monday, I was at the clinic checking on my dad, and I decided to stay the night with him to keep him company. We started to talk about all sorts of things, and then I mentioned to him that I had the creepiest sense of deja vu prior to coming to the clinic. One thing led to another, and we went on talking about the brain, false memories, and so on. Then my dad told me one of the weirdest things that he had ever experienced back in his 20s. He never told anyone about this before, so I was intrigued. He said he was still a college student at that time. It was the holidays for our country, and he came back to his hometown. He had some old friends who invited him to their place for dinner. He stayed up with them until around midnight. Then he left to go to his parents' house. My dad's hometown is small, and people don't hang around the streets, especially late in the fall. He remembered walking and then hearing the sound of hooves clicking against the concrete sidewalk. He looked behind him, and he saw a horse. The horse didn't have a saddle or a bridle on. Dad said it was a typical dark brown horse, the kind your mind would conjure up whenever you thought of the word horse. Dad thought that it must have run off from somewhere, but he didn't know of any farms around the town. The horse kept walking. It moved past my father, paying him no attention. Dad was confused, so we followed the horse. The horse took a turn, and my father went after it, only to find nothing. The turn the horse took was a dead-end alley. Dad said there were no doors or passages or side buildings, just a plain dead end. The horse was nowhere to be seen. The sound of its hooves disappeared. Dad was so creeped out, he ran all the way home. To this day, he has no idea where that horse came from and to where it went. I want to say this before I start. I'm 28 years old, healthy of body and sound of mind. I don't do drugs, I don't drink, and I'm not under any form of medication. I haven't experienced anything paranormal in my life, except for that one dorm room in which I lived back when I was in college. Even then, I never saw anything, just felt something, which my roommates also experienced at that time. With that out of the way, I'm going to tell you exactly what I went through. A week ago, at about 2 in the afternoon, I was coming down the stairs, from the second floor to the first floor, in order to feed my dog and cat. I, with startling clarity, remember tripping on the way down, falling and breaking my neck. I have the recollection of that event in my brain, which is the weirdest part. Next thing I knew, it was almost as if someone pressed a rewind button, and I was back halfway through the stairs. Only this time, I didn't trip. I walked down normally, and once I reached the first floor, I felt so weird. Like I was almost outside of my own body for a moment. I freaked out for a while, and I started to question my sanity. Eventually, I moved past what happened, fed my pets, and busied myself with paperwork. That day, my cat, who was usually very aloof, kept following me around the whole day, staring at me constantly. He even slept on the bed that night, and he doesn't usually do that. I have no way to explain what happened. Was it a hallucination? What kind of experience is this? Here's one of the earliest things that happened. I was in high school, 16 or 17 years old. I was at a friend's place, staying overnight. I went to a Catholic school, and this happened to be a very Catholic family. We were eating dinner, and there was a lull in the conversation. And I thought, oh crap, I have to talk about something. As I was pretty self-conscious at the time, and apparently thought it was my responsibility to be chatty. Anywho, I racked my brain trying to think of something to say. Couldn't come up with anything, and started looking around the room for something, anything that I could talk about. I saw a tapestry of Jesus on the wall, and I said, incredibly lamely, "That's a nice tapestry of Jesus." My friend's parents turned, looked at it, nodded, said something enthralling like yes and thank you. Awkward silence fell again, and maybe 2 seconds later, the entire thing fell off the wall onto the floor. Everyone kind of jumped. We all looked at the blank spot on the wall, and the parents looked back at me. And the dad said, with a great deal of disbelief, "The tapestry fell off the wall. That's never happened before." And I said, "I'm sorry," because I didn't know what else to say. Some folks would likely think this was a coincidence, but around that time, in my teens and high school, things were falling down around all the time. I was once sitting in our tiny study on the floor watching TV. All of a sudden, the damn glass shade of the light in the ceiling fell down in my lap. It's the kind of light where you have to unscrew 3 screws to release it properly. A heavy chipboard poster fell on me while I was sitting on my bed once, out of nowhere. When I found out my grandpa died in my teens again, I was distraught and sobbing in my room about how I never got to say goodbye. Shortly afterwards, my mum and my brother started talking about how they heard footsteps coming up the wooden stairs and down the hall and stopping outside me and my parents' door. I never heard them. Apparently, Mum opened the door once, thinking it was me or my bro, and nobody was there. They heard this over and over. They heard bangs and things as well. And one night when we were eating dinner together downstairs, we heard this loud banging noise on the stairs. We all looked at each other and said our cat's name, but our cat was actually outside. We figured it was probably Grandpa. Mom had the house exercised, and the noises never came back. Personally, I think that was probably a little rude. I have heard knocking and tapping near my bed frequently, with no apparent source, both when I was young up to when I was in my mid-30s. I've seen 4 ghosts in my life, but I've only heard one speak. The first ghosts I ever saw were 2 males in workman's gear from probably the mid-1800s. Not sure, but it certainly wasn't the 1990s. I was doing seasonal work at a ski resort in Montana at the time, and I was living in old dorm-style housing, just down from the main resort. I was sleeping, and I woke up knowing that there were people looking at me. I saw these 2 men standing in the room, one older and a little taller, and the other both wearing pretty distinctive hats, and they were pointing at me. So I pointed to them, trying to reach them, and they slowly disappeared. They looked as if someone had taken a grayscale photo and just sort of overlaid it in the room. Lots of detail, but no colour. They didn't say anything, just pointed. I felt no fear at all. The next 2 ghosts I saw came at 2 very stressful points in my life, very close together. I was having trouble sleeping at one point, lots of tossing and turning, lots of worrying. Hubby had just left the room, and I turned on my back and looked up, and there was the head of an old woman in front and above me. I couldn't really make out her features. I saw her hair, sort of curly around her head, like my nana's used to be. I knew it wasn't my nana though. It felt like a person who was a little irritated. The head was there for maybe half a minute, and then she just faded away, like the guys I mentioned above. It didn't freak me out because I knew that I was only able to see that much of her. I didn't see it as only a head floating around, just only the part I could see. I told my hubby about it when he came back, and he took the computer that was on the opposite side of the room off its screensaver and suggested I had actually seen the picture of Aragon that he had on his desktop. I just calmly explained that no, the head wasn't that low. It was up there, and that her hair hadn't been anywhere near as cool. The last time I saw a ghost was when I was extremely distressed. We just found out that a family friend had been murdered. They knew who did it. The husband of the woman who'd been murdered was going to come and stay with us for a while, and I was basically drowning in how horrible this all was. I was downstairs in the study and crying, and I slowly realised that I could see the oddly negative shape of someone sitting in the computer chair diagonally across from me. I stopped crying very quickly because I realised that I could actually see the head of this person, their legs over the chair, and their arms on the armrests, but there was no detail at all. This was in a brightly lit room. It looked like a featureless shape of a person sitting there, but in a weird negative way. Not dark at all. It's very hard to describe. Closest thing I can think of is like the invisibility camo from Predator, with less choppiness. I stared at this person blinking and I said, "What?" out loud. And slowly, it faded. I was confused more than anything, but also strangely comforted. Lastly, the only ghost I've ever heard speak was at Fort Delaware, in the Endicott. I had 2 visits to Fort Delaware as I worked in the parks at the time. The first was for a Halloween tour that I'll explain in a minute. The second was as an emergency stand-in interpreter during an actual ghost hunting tour, organised after the Ghost Hunters episode. It was an interesting tour. I had to learn about the history and use the rooms pretty quickly while we took the ferry over. We basically moved from room to room, as did about 6 other groups, staggered across the fort. At each stop, I would talk about the history, and then the ghost hunter crew member would start asking questions and watching the little light up doohickey for responses. Nothing really happened on most of the tour, but I'll never forget the sound I heard when I was passing through the Endicott, right near the spot where that footage was taken of the soldier, and where ghost hunters caught something on the flare. This was, by the way, before I saw the episode. A guy had gone in front of me, and the rest of the tour was way ahead. It was really dark in that spot, but we had flashlights. And I heard from my right something very whispery, very raspy, that spoke 2 syllables. I asked the guy when I was through that bit if he'd heard it, and he said no. I've no idea what it said. My name is 2 syllables long, but frankly, it could have been anything. Weird, weird sound. I found it utterly hilarious and a little irritating when I finally watched the Ghost Hunters episode based at Fort Delaware, because they mentioned a ghost account by a lady who saw a lamp off a table. They dismissed it immediately as she just knocked it off the table. No, I was on that tour. I was busy walking back and forth on the roof of the fort, swinging a lantern while dressed up as a Union soldier. This was during a Halloween tour before ghost hunters had been there. Halloween tours were totally for fun. We had mad scientists chopping up people in the Endicott, ghosts and zombies everywhere. It was great. I was on the boat heading back when the lady told her story. She was an utterly normal, friendly lady in her late 50s. Her sole job was to wait in the officers' rooms under a window that faced the courtyard and scream when the group passed. She had been waiting for the next group to arrive. There was a lamp on the table next to her. She was sitting there, not doing anything, not fidgeting, not kicking out with her legs, not moving. She said that out of the blue, the lamp was thrown off the table to the floor. It didn't fall. She didn't knock it off. She told everyone sitting with her on the boat because she was freaked out. Somehow, that made it to the Ghost Hunters team and was dismissed just like that. It annoyed me so much watching that episode. My dad died in 2016. I was able to spend a lot of time with him before we went, and my brother and I set him up in an amazing care facility in Australia, where he was for a couple of months before we went. This place had a small cafe with a barista, and I would frequently go and grab us a coffee. Dad couldn't walk anymore, and I was having a harder time getting him into a wheelchair to get him out of the room and inside. He also wasn't eating as much or interested in much of anything. This is all pretty normal for someone who's dying. I knew he was, and I knew he'd go pretty soon, but nobody else seemed to think so for some reason. I asked Dad if he'd like a latte, and for the first time in a few days, he said yes. I was excited he was interested, so I headed over to the cafe, got us both a coffee, and headed right back. I walked into the room and said, "Got your coffee, Dad?" I noticed Dad was staring at the far corner of the room. He looked from the corner of the room to me when I walked in. Then after I spoke, he looked back to the corner and back to me and said, "What about Mom?" My mum died in 2008. Now, since I've seen ghosts and had a bunch of weird experiences, I'm all aboard on this train. And without missing a beat, I look at the corner and him and I say, I can get a coffee for Mum, no worries. And Dad looked from me to the corner, back at me, the reality clearly dawning on him, then quickly shook his head. While my dad did have some confusion when he first came to this place, he settled down pretty quick. He didn't see anything else that he mentioned and was lucid right up to the end. I'd like to think that Mum came to see him off. One was a massive dump of all my experiences. The other was about a special visit my dying dad had before he died. This one just popped into my head today, and I hadn't thought about it for a long time. I used to work in a state park, and I loved it. While out on a hike with a school group, I found myself stopping at a section of the trail that I hadn't really paid much attention to before. But I stopped there as the kids followed the other lead because there was something about that place. Couldn't really put a finger on it. It wasn't all that spectacular of view. The river had chewed away a great deal of the bank. I couldn't see any wildlife. But it felt important and special, and I realised that I loved that spot. I continued on with the kids and didn't think much of it. A little while later, my boyfriend, who I'd been with for a long while, asked if I'd like to go for a hike. I said yeah, and he said, let's go to your favourite spot. So I took him to a spot that I really liked, closer to where I worked, that was much more scenic. We stood there and he asked if it was my favourite spot. And I thought about it and said, well, actually, there's another spot that I like. We hiked there and we stopped there, and I said that I didn't really know why I felt this was such a special spot. But it was. I really liked how the place felt. And I turned around to find him getting down on one knee and holding out a ring. His proposal was lovely. The ring was perfect, and of course I started blubbering like crazy and said yes. Honestly, I probably should have guessed he was going to do this because he got dressed up too. But it's like I knew something very special was going to happen in that place. And it's a little funny too, that the only reason it happened in that place is because I felt something special was going to happen there. I've had little knowings like this my whole life, but this one will always stand out. This happened 8 years ago at my grandparents' ancestral house. Apart from the usual mischief of the duende, our house rarely displays apparitions from the other world. We have a superstitious belief that we should never leave a house without any person or people for a long period of time. If you do, someone or something might live there. Our house was built in the late 70s. The ground floor was used as our living quarters, while the upper floor just gathered dust, because I have only my mom and my brother residing there in a single room for the time being. One night, I was talking with my significant other through the phone on the second floor of the house. I went there because of privacy, while also maintaining the silence on the ground floor. The time, if I recall, was past midnight. We've always been liking talking from this evening till the wee hours in the morning. As I'm trying to make a laugh, I saw a tentacle-like white greyish long thing fitting through the jalousie window. I'm describing it as a tentacle because of the motion it made. It's slithering, of what I thought of at the time, its whole body forcing its way to come in. At first my brain was still not afraid, because it might be a snake, because we have lots of trees inside our property. Notice I said tentacles, because I can't for the life of me relate that thing to a human hand. I just saw it as a long white thing. Know how a grandma uses her hands to do Tai Chi? That's the way it's moving. Next thing I know, there's another long thing which I now realised is the other hand to get inside. What fucked my brain out was its head was trying to get inside also. I'm afraid. That's why I can't look at its face. My breath is now shallow. I can't think of anything. I'm stuttering, and my significant other noticed it too and asked why. I told her what I saw and said, keep talking to me. I shut my eyes, but once I opened it was still there. Now it's waving its hands and shaking its head vigorously so it knows that I can see it. I muster up my courage and nudge myself a little so I won't be able to see him. I think I moved 12 inches on the right just so I can remove him from my vision. Know what I did? It also moved to its right just so I can also see it. This thing knows that I'm afraid. In the beginning, the motion of its hand is like a Tai Chi grandma. Now, it's dabbing to its right so I can see both its hands. Once that happened, I steeled myself and almost jumped the stairs to go to my brother and mother. After a few moments, I asked him to go with me, but we didn't find anything. Seems nothing out of the ordinary happened. What bothers me up to this day is I can't remember if I looked at its face or just the peripheral vision, because every time I try to remember its face, I just see a blank face. No eyes, no mouth, no facial hair, just blank. Up to this day, I don't know what kind of ghost it is, but typing this up until 3 a.m. gives me the chills. A few months ago, my uncle invited me to go to a well-known paranormal hotspot with him in his group. I've always been open-minded about the paranormal, as I've had other experiences with what I believe to be spirits or ghosts. The place in question is an old, out-of-use prison, used to hold political prisoners and murderers, etc. Me and my uncle arrived first, and so we thought he should show me around. We walked down every wing, long dark hallways leading up from the main foyer, all with prison cells on each side, of course. The least frightening experience was when I saw a dark figure standing there, and I looked at my uncle, and looked back, it was gone. This is when I realised my belief in the paranormal had been well placed. He then showed me to a room, or cell. The reason I call it a room is because it was the most luxurious smell. It had comfortable pillows, a big soft mattress, and a bookcase to top it all off. The very bookcase, which when slid over, leads to the room the prisoner would be hanged in. The noose came from the ceiling, and a large glass floor came down and led to the coffin room. Before my uncle showed me what was behind the bookcase, I saw a huge white flash come from the cracks behind the bookshelf. I get chills as I'm writing this. After my uncle opened the bookcase, I saw a large black figure peek over his shoulder. This terrified me. It seemed normal to him. Under the prison, there's a long, dark tunnel, which leads to the old courthouse across the road. As an initiation, they made me walk to the end of the tunnel with all the lights off, knock the rusty metal door at the end, and ask for "Sir" when I came within 5 feet of that door. I felt a horrible feeling, like something was waiting for me. I strongly hesitated, but I knocked on the door and asked for "Sir." As I walked briskly back to the group, I heard them all exclaim. They said something walked back with me, a dark figure. I didn't believe them until someone else did, and I promise you, a large black figure came slowly from the wall and walked behind him. I thought because it was so dark, it was just another person walking with them, until I remembered he walked down alone. So this has been going on for many years, but I just ignored it since it happened like 3 times. But now it's way more common, and it's freaking me out. So I'll start with my first experience, the closet. I was 12 years old, I think, and me and my sister shared the room. It was summer, and we were about to go to the beach. Since I'm a guy, I took my stuff off and entered the closet. At that time, my sister left the house. I changed and was about to leave the closet, but the closet door just shut so hard that I saw the movement of the door closing and I couldn't leave. I tried everything, but when I just can't open it. I called my sister and said if she doesn't open the door, I'll beat her. Boom, door opened on its own. I was about to beat her, but the room was empty. And then I saw my sister out the window. She said she was out and was getting her bikini. We just laughed it off. The second experience was also in our room. but with my sister and two cousins. We bought so many sweets and treats and were having fun the whole evening. But then we heard a weird noise somewhere in the room, like a sharpening knife. My little cousin got really scared, so we all tried to cheer him up. Now we went to sleep. All night, I heard someone walking across the room. I was too scared to check. In the morning, we sat down on the floor, and my older cousin said she barely got any sleep because of someone walking in the room, and I froze. Since she was on the floor, she could have at least seen who the person was walking, because I was sleeping with my face to the wall. Younger and sister didn't hear anything, but got scared anyway. After this, I had problems sleeping. The third thing that was weird was two mirrors breaking all of a sudden on their own in the middle of the night. It's been years since that happened, and the next thing's happened in the last 3 months. A glass of Coca-Cola just crossed the whole length of a table in front of my mom, sister, and me. We thought maybe the table glass moved, but then why didn't anything else move? My mom saw someone closing the bathroom door, thinking it was me, but I was in my room. She was like, "Luca, hurry, I can't hold it anymore." And then I left the room and said, "What is it?" Mom entered the bathroom, and it was empty. Now, my room is divided by the wall, creating 2 rooms. One for my sister and one for me. And when we went to talk, we used our phones. I had to study that night, but my sister wanted to play some Tycoon on Roblox. And since all I have to do is to be and save money, I accepted. We were talking and talking, and we heard someone washing the dishes in the kitchen. And we were like, "What the fuck? It's 2 a.m. When we checked, the kitchen was empty. My dad heard loud running footsteps in the hallway in the middle of the night. We don't know if he heard any of us. My mom's sister and I went to KFC for lunch, and we made sure everything was turned off. TV, lights, laptops, etc. And we closed the windows and locked the house. When we came back home, the TV was on. My mom was angry, but I know I turned it off. And the last one is the scariest thing that happened last week. Me and my sister were home, she was in her room, alone, and I was making the food. I had some problems, so I really focused on what I was doing. "Come on," said my sister, or so I thought, and I answered, "What now?" I didn't get an answer. Then something poked me on the shoulder and I said, "Leave me alone, I'm doing something." Then again something poked me on the shoulder and I was like, "Lorena, leave me alone." Again something poked me and I turned around and screamed, "Lorena!" But no one was there. And then I checked her and she was in her bed. When I was young, probably around 8 years old, I was playing hide and seek with my friends. This was what I believe was the first paranormal experience I had that I remember. So I went to the basement and hid. My friend came down and I'll always remember since he went pale white and ran away as he looked at me. I chased after him and was like, "Why did you run away?" He replied he saw a shadow of a person behind me where I was hiding with red eyes. I thought to myself, "What the fuck? And you left me there?" And this is why it stood out. Fast forward to me being 17 or 18. It was a Sunday. Just finished my roast dinner. Friends called me and asked, "Shall we go to Plucky Woods, the most haunted woods in the UK?" I'm sure. So we drove down there, got to the woods and were messing around. And then, as it got dark and the sun set, the woods literally went pitch black. These were the times where I didn't have a torch app on the phone and had to take photos in order to get some sort of light. Shouted to my friends to meet them back at the car. As I was taking photos to avoid falling over, etc., I noticed in the camera there's a green mist of some sort. Thinking it was a reflection of the tree's moss, I didn't take notice of it. As we all got in the car, I was like, "Lads, looking at these photos," and started swiping from the beginning. Sure enough, that mist was swirling around on the outside and coming in the middle of the screen as the photos kept moving to the next one. Then it turned into a face similar to the Mummy movie with his face in the sand. As we all saw that, we screamed, mainly because the inside car lights just started flickering randomly, on and off. We drove away from there sharpish. I get the chills thinking about it now. Deleted everything, unfortunately, because I didn't want anything like that latching onto me, or so I thought. Fast forward 4 more years later in Germany. I moved to a different room in the camp. Everything seemed fine, except in the middle of the night, I started getting sleep paralysis. Waking up with a shadow of a person standing over me, pinning me down. The only way for me to wake up from that was to scream. Honestly, even screaming in that stage took a lot of effort. My roommates are like, what the fuck? I'm trying to rationalize things during the day. This kept happening for another few days. At one point I was like, fuck, it shows me what's the worst you can do. I felt my leg being grabbed and dragged. Never dared it again. We went back to the UK for a few weeks holiday, and even my mom was like, you screamed last night. I didn't even remember it, but I had a vivid dream of being choked and lifted in our hallway. So when I returned, I moved rooms, and even in that room at midnight, as I fell asleep, I woke up again with the noise of some of the guys outside the block. I see a shadow in the corner of the room, and fuck me, it jumped on top of me and grabbed my upper arms, which I screamed. And even the guy next door asked me, what the fuck? What was that about? In the morning. I showed him the bruises, and I was glad we moved to a different block then. We've had occasions where people hear showers being turned on and off when no one's there. So I went to Canada, forgetting about these terrible events, and as I got asked to stay for 3 weeks over Christmas to cover the cells, I was sure it would be an easy 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks holiday after that. That Sunday, the last person to get moved out of the cell, so I was free starting Monday and just on call. So on the first Monday night, I woke up to my duvet getting pulled off slowly. So the next day, I was like, fuck it, I'll leave the light on. I was the only person in that block. Imagine an old asylum. Those were similar to what we stayed in, converted to accommodation. Tuesday night I wake up again, and this time with the light on, I see a shadow over me. Yeah, I kept my eyes closed. So Wednesday onwards, I had to resort to drastic measures and literally kept myself awake till I passed out and watched funny movies, etc. But I could hear it. Knockings on the middle of my wardrobe. No, it wasn't the radiator or plumbing, because trust me, I know the sound difference between them. I remembered my friend stayed last Christmas time to do guard duty, so I asked him if he experienced anything weird. His reply was it's a friendly ghost. Let it in and accept it. He told me the exact same shit that happened to me as his personal experience. Having seen enough horror movies, it's 100% a no-no to let anything in. 3 long grueling weeks of staying up until I passed out, finally over. Promised myself to never ever volunteer for that again. After a few days in my old room with sleep paralysis, I met one of the guys who now had that as his bed space. So after the party was at my old room, and I was like, this is my old room. Experienced anything weird here? His reply was yeah. I've woken up from sleep paralysis and had a shadow of a person standing at the end of my bed a few times. His answer sort of gave me closure, that I definitely wasn't crazy and imagining it to myself. I grew up in the countryside in Ireland. The house was originally a small cottage. My parents bought it before I was born, and they renovated it and added an extension on. There were 5 other houses on our country road, the closest being a large field away. I didn't know much about the history of our house, the land it was built on, or the history of the area, other than an elderly lady lived in the cottage before my parents bought it, and she passed away in a nursing home. The only info I have about the area, it was old and it was a civil parish. Whenever we get together as a family, we always end up talking about the house and what we experienced. We moved out 6 years ago. I don't know who or what it was, but there was definitely more than one ghost or spirit. It seemed like a lot. I don't know if it has anything to do with the graveyard, what they found, the house, or the land itself. I really don't feel like it was the woman that lived there before us either. My mom, dad, two brothers, myself, obviously, and friends that stayed over all experienced something or got a weird vibe. Funnily enough, almost everything that happened in the new and built part of the house rather than the old part, and stuff happened outside too. I would often feel like there was someone in my room, and I don't know why, but I felt like it was a man. I would never chill in my room alone, and I'd dread nighttime coming to go to sleep. I just felt like someone was there. I heard what sounded like someone walking around, not footsteps, but just like the movements of someone. I often felt like I was being watched, inside and outside. Fair enough, that could have just been my imagination, or me freaking myself out as a kid. On multiple occasions, I heard what sounded like children talking and playing, but no one would be there. On one occasion, I heard what sounded like a choir singing in the direction of the graveyard and church. And on a separate occasion, I heard what sounded like drums being played. It was like this weird repetitive rhythm, hard to describe. Another time, I was outside playing near the side of the house. I was kneeling down, and it was as if someone threw a small stone or pebble, not at me, but in my direction from behind. So I heard the stone land, as if someone threw it, and it happened 3 times within like 20 seconds. I turned around, but of course, no one was there. On another occasion, I went to bed really early when it was still bright out. I remember this so vividly, I can even remember the duvet cover that was on. So I was laying down, wide awake, and it felt as if someone poked me pretty hard. It was like a strong index finger poking my lower back. I kind of froze, felt freaked out, didn't turn around, and just convinced myself it was one of my teddy paws, and didn't think about it again until years later. From the living room window, my brother saw a man in a hat, smoking a cigarette, standing outside, leaning against the wall near the front door. He got up like, who the hell was that? Went out, no one was there or anywhere near, and he didn't hear him run away, which brings me to my next point. On a couple of occasions, my mom heard someone knock on the back door, but when she went to answer it, no one was there. Again, she didn't hear them walk or run away. Another time, she saw the silhouette of someone, again smoking, through the window of the back door, as if they were standing outside the door. As usual, no one was there. On a couple of occasions, she felt as though someone was sitting in the back of the car with her when she left our house to go to the shop in the late evenings. The feeling was so strong that she'd keep looking in the mirror and even stop the car and look under the seat to make sure no one was there. My dad, who's a skeptic, saw a black shadow down the end of the hall go from one side to the other. My other brother felt like someone touched his foot in bed, and on a couple of occasions heard what sounded like someone walking down the hallway and stopping outside his door, as if they were going to come in, but hesitating. He would call out to see who it was, but no one answered, so it wasn't any of us. He would also see the hallway lights being turned on and off, and when he was outside around the back garden, he would get this sudden urge or feeling that he should go inside, and he would run our dog, started and barking at nothing a couple of times. And a friend of mine that stayed over hated when she had to wake up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, because she felt like someone was watching her from the end of the hallway. I saw an unidentified flying object in my backyard last month, and I can't find any explanation for what it could be. I was inside our house finishing up some work, but I could see my boyfriend and our dog in the backyard through the back door window. Suddenly, I hear our dog barking. As I glance up to observe what it was unnerving her, I realise that it's something flying alongside the back of our 10-foot fence. Quickly, I open the back door and walk onto our patio. The creature was completely silent and looked like a straight yellow line that was hovering 5 or 6 feet in the air and moving in a precise, straight formation. And let me tell you, this thing was fast. My dog is a greyhound mix and extremely agile, and even she couldn't keep up with it. It was a little less than a foot long and a centimetre or two thick. I couldn't tell if it was glowing or if it was just the combination of the glow from our backyard lights and its golden tone that gave off this illusion. Because it was flying and clearly much faster than my dog, it wasn't acting like it was trying to evade danger. I had the feeling that it was fairly intelligent. It was almost playing with my dog, like it was playing a game of tag. It flew back and forth 4 or 5 times in a straight line at about 20 or 30 miles an hour, I'd say. My dog attempted to catch it, running as it moved to the opposite side of the fence. But once she started to catch up, it would start flying in the opposite direction, without ever getting to turn around. It flew in a smooth, unwavering manner, like when you point a laser at the wall and move it back and forth to get your cat's attention. Obviously, I wanted to get this on video or at least a picture, but I wanted to get a closer look because my mind needed an explanation. As I moved closer, it quickly flew over our fence and I never saw it again. But I could hear the rustling of leaves around the side of our house. After I knew it was gone, I looked at my boyfriend and his face said it all. I asked him what he saw to confirm that my mind wasn't simply playing tricks. His experience was the same as mine. We both have been looking for this thing every night since we saw it, but to no avail. We still have no idea what this unexplained creature could be. Has anyone else had an experience like mine? Or any explanation for what it could be? I've just heard of the Hat Man and did some Googling, only to find that this Hat Man is some evil entity that many people seem to encounter, mostly during sleep paralysis. The part that gives me chills is when I read the description of what he looks like and see images replicating those descriptions. He looks exactly like this shadow man I saw everywhere when I was a kid. I saw him from the ages of 7 to 14 when I lived in a 2-story house. Except I never saw him in my dreams like a lot of others seem to. I saw him in the hallways. Anytime I didn't look down a hallway, I would see him in my peripheral vision. For example, if I was walking to my room, I would see him slightly standing at the end of the walkway, opposite my room. It only ever happened if I didn't look down the hallways before walking past them. Just like what I read, this shadow man was just a black silhouette. No features except for a detective-type hat and a trench coat. Never once did it approach me. I would see it in my peripheral, and the second I'd fully look towards him, the figure would be gone. It also said that he feeds on people's worst fears, and if my shadow man was the Hat Man, he was very much feeding off my fear of a bad guy being in my house, and waiting for the perfect moment to catch me, as I was a really paranoid kid growing up. What are your thoughts? I still don't know too much about the Hat Man, but it seems pretty straightforward. About 2 years ago, I was watching a movie at my sister's room and saw some white figure at the window in my peripheral vision. When I looked to the window, there was a faceless nun. Actually, I couldn't see a face, but I knew she was staring at me, dressed in an all-white habit with a red cross on her gwim. It wasn't a crucifix she wore, it was a red cross printed like her gwim. I was in shock. I mean, how could someone get inside? To get to my sister's window, she'd need to pass through my house gate and walk 25 meters without being noticed. And well, how could she? When I looked down to pause the movie, she simply turned left, walked away and disappeared. But that shouldn't be possible, since there's another locked gate and then a dead end. I barely slept that night. My eyes were watery and I was still in shock and telling myself it was just a hallucination. Later that year, I was drawing something when I realized I had drawn a freaking faceless nun wearing many crucifixes, with a weird crown, and with her arms open, looking like she was floating. About 3 months ago, I was drawing a female figure with a charcoal, and again, I ended up drawing a nun. Exactly like the last one, and I decided to put on my closet door because why the hell not? My mom saw and hated it. Then I told her about the nun I saw years before, and she told me that maybe I see apparitions. Maybe I'm sensitive, because my grandma is. My mom said I just should throw the drawing away, but I didn't, and left it in there. A few days later, I had a dream I was in a big old house, and there were four nuns looking just like my drawing, and they were side by side, arms crossed, staring at me at the top of the stairs, swinging, oscillating back and forth. I woke up very scared and later told Mom about that. She said I should burn the drawing, and so I did. But every now and then, I cannot stop thinking about that nun.
This is WOR New York. Stay tuned for conversation. First, this bulletin from the WOR newsroom. 6 members of one family have been found shot to death in their nightclothes in their expensive home in Amityville, Long Island. The only available information at this moment, according to the Amityville Village Police, is that the victims have been identified as members of the DeFeo family. They were found by their 23-year-old son, Ronald DeFeo, who is believed to be the only surviving member of the family. 6 members of one family were found shot to death in their home in Amityville, Long Island. We'll have further details on the 11 o'clock news. This was the first radio broadcast to announce the murders in the Amityville Horror House at 112 Ocean Avenue. The entire DeFeo family was shot by one of their own, Ronald. This terrible event would spark the start of a current-day legend. A legend which around 15 Amityville films were made. Ronald, to begin with, claimed that a hitman murdered them, whom he named. But this tale was proved wrong, for the reason that the intended hitman was not in New York at the time of the murders. The very next day, Ronald confessed to having killed his family all by himself. He stated, "It all happened so fast. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." What he called it started around 3 in the morning at 112 Ocean Street. Ronald took his .35 caliber rifle and psychotically shot his brothers, sisters, mother and father. 1 bullet for his siblings and 2 for his parents. Later, Ronald bathed and redressed, threw his gun into the swimming pool, and then went to work normally. It wasn't until later that day, around 6:30 p.m, that Ronald opened up about the death of his family. While Ronald's story about the bloody event has been inconsistent, the most famous claim is that he had killed his family due to demonic voices in his head. At some point in his trial, Ronald's advocates set up a defense of insanity, which was supported by means of a court psychiatrist. Regardless, the judgment determined Ronald was both responsible and had control over his actions, and sentenced him to 6 consecutive life sentences. In the following years, Ronald claimed that he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol when he executed the murders. In another model of the story, his sister Dawn was the murderer. His story was changed so often that the handiest reality which we will now be certain of is that Ronald DeFeo is a liar. Certainly, perhaps the most demonic issue of the Amityville murders is the creativeness of the killer himself. However, in spite of Ronald's terrible lies, there are things which make this case peculiar. All the victims had been located lying on their stomachs, without signs of struggle. Toxicology reports have proved that no sedatives were used, and police determined no proof of Ronald having used a silencer on his very loud rifle. How then did the DeFeos continue to be asleep in their beds as Ronald killed them one after the other? Dr. Howard Edelman, the examiner on the case, said that he was mystified as to how a single gunman could have committed the crime. In reaction, there have been several competing theories, but none in reality satisfies the question of how Ronald went on a flurry of kills when the others were asleep. Even if the house did not already host an evil entity, being the scene of such a grotesque crime, it would have hosted one after these events. A bit over a year later, 112 Ocean Avenue, the scene of these dreadful murders, became home to a new family. The residence, with all its furniture intact, was sold to George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 kids. Although they had knowledge about the gruesome things that had taken place there, the Lutzes were positive, describing the residence as their dream home. They even set up a sign that named the house High Hopes, but they could only inhabit the house for 28 days. They would forcefully emerge from its partitions, running out in their nightwear, leaving behind all of their possessions and never returning. Whilst you listen to any of the Lutz's testimonies, there's a feeling that they're telling the truth. On the very first day of moving into the house, the Lutzes commenced feeling as though something wasn't right. A family friend and neighborhood Catholic priest, Father Ralph Pecoraro, visited the house to perform a blessing. George told what occurred in one of his final interviews before his death in 2006. Whilst blessing, the priest was disturbed by a weird feeling he got in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Pecoraro told George, who informed him that it had been the stitching room. The priest, who supposedly appeared relieved, then stated, "That's good, as long as no one sleeps in there." Paranormal activities unfolded very soon. Within a week, Kathy's hand had been touched by something that we discussed and couldn't explain. It was just something unseen, are George's own words. We also had hordes of flies that would appear within 2 rooms. And no matter how many times we would kill them, they would reappear. Lisa added in the interview, "It wasn't in the water. The floor itself turned black, and at first it was the one bathroom, and then another, and then another. And then the telephone repairman came 3 times, because each time we tried to communicate with the priest, we would run into faulty connections," George added. Time and again, noises jolted the family from their sleep during the night. George was the one who was disturbed the most. He described how the front door would violently open and close, and when he investigated, he would see it locked with the dog asleep in front of it. Paranormal investigator Ed Warren drew interest in how most of the paranormal events occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning, the same time Ronald DeFeo murdered his own family. Kathy Lutz mentioned that she got into a state of deep, contented lethargy in the house. She would by no means want to leave. Even the simplest of chores became too much for her. Others have said how the house appeared to age Kathy, both mentally and physically. On the night that they fled the house, George claims to have witnessed his wife become an aged woman before his very eyes. The visage took several hours to wear off. Although it's too easy to push aside the Lutz's tale as a made-up one, the consistency with which they maintain their story makes it arguably believable. A documentary filmed in 2012, after the deaths of both Kathy and George, has introduced additional proof of intrigue to the Amityville case. For the first time since 1976, one of the Lutz youngsters, Daniel Lutz, came forward to discuss his childhood experience. Daniel has corroborated his mum's and stepfather's stories while adding some of his own. One of the most disturbing events, which has haunted him since the day it befell, was when he saw the door of the boathouse open and shut repeatedly with extreme violence. The family dog, Harry, with his pen being inside the boat residence, was visibly disturbed. In an attempt to get away, he jumped over the fence of his pen and apparently seemed to hang himself. After rescuing the dog, it took Daniel and George an amazing effort to close the door. It was then Daniel remembers one of the weirdest elements of his stories in Amityville. In the course of the interview, his own disbelief at what he saw, even a few years later, is quite obvious to look at. When the reporter asked, "What did you see? What was in the window?" Daniel replied, "It would have been what looked like a cartoon character of an angry pig with wolf-like teeth." When he and George went upstairs to investigate, they found a rocking chair moving all by itself. Daniel claimed that he was possessed by a powerful entity in the house. Even after leaving the Amityville house, Daniel was sent to a Catholic monastic school by his parents. There, the priests performed exorcism rituals for a year to rid him of the demon which had possessed him in that house. I had just gotten in a fight with George about, I don't even remember anymore. So by the time I got to the second landing, I was projected up the stairs into the wall, and my mother was like 15 feet behind me. I know that the spirit of some other thing passed right through me. My mother was standing right there, and she broke down and cried. That was the most horrible thing she'd ever seen. And I stand up, and my body starts like, I no longer have control of myself. She jumped around in shock, like something just scraped her or touched her, and it entered into me, through me. And if I have to describe what it felt like, it'd be like the numbness after being shot. From somewhere in the room, it said, "It is you." It was like a sub bass, like a gargle and a crackle to it. And that stuck with me for at least a decade on a daily basis. Are words from Daniel in the interview. On the last night the Lutzes spent at Amityville, an unseen force lifted Katie and the two boys up with their beds. Daniel says he still remembers the sense of terror he felt as the headboard of his and his brother's beds smashed at each other and the ceiling. They were trapped on the beds as it levitated. This became the tipping point, and they couldn't tolerate it anymore. After 28 days of living with a constant feeling of terror, the Lutzes called Father Pecoraro, who suggested that they go away from the house and spend the night at another place. In March of 1976, psychics, paranormal researchers, and a news crew were allowed access to 112 Ocean Avenue. Amongst the investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warren. During the initial investigation, Lorraine got repulsed when she entered one of the rooms, which was later observed to have been the bedroom of Ronald DeFeo. Lorraine believed that even as numerous spirits roamed the house, there was one unique entity which was more powerful and malevolent than the others. When we went into the house that day, we didn't realise that it was diabolically infested. This case had everything. It had the monstrosities of the night, which roamed that house, which infested it, which caused a young man to murder his whole family. The Amityville case affected our personal lives more than any case we've ever worked on. This is what the Warrens had to say about the house in an interview. Warren's photographer captured the notorious photo of a spectral kid in a doorway. A few have speculated that that is the youngest member of the family to be murdered in 1974, John Matthew DeFeo. Daniel Lutz states that each one of the hauntings was brought about by George Lutz. In spite of denials during his lifetime, Daniel asserts that George was a person who enjoyed occult rituals. I think somewhere along the line that George's beliefs and practices, and things that he was directly involved with, triggered and was a catalyst to what was going on in the house. It was kind of like a magic trick gone bad that you couldn't shut off, said Daniel. He also states that George used to be an abusive stepfather, a reason that led him to leave the house at the age of 15. It's interesting that Daniel might corroborate the tale of a man who repulsed him and abused him as a child. His statements might give insights into why George preserved all of the possessions of folks that had died in the residence before. Should it be that, as a dabbler inside the occult, George knew something of the alleged power of death and blood? Possibly George Lutz has attempted to interact with this energy. In this process of interacting with the souls of the DeFeos, did George disturb something darker? As a result, did he unleash demonic forces which he couldn't control upon himself and his own family? Unfortunately, all we're able to do is raise questions.
Some time ago, me and my family went to a city close to ours to visit family. Everything was fine. We had lots of fun, and I saw my cousins that I hadn't seen in a while. We decided to go camping, but returned to Aunt's home some hours after, a little traumatized. But more than traumatized, I was intrigued. I wanted to see and explained what happened in the woods. So I begged my mom to let me stay another day. She said that she and my dad had work the next day. My aunt then interfered and said that I can stay and that she can take care of me. My parents trusted her. Bad idea. My aunt was a remarried woman, and the guy she married wasn't much to my family's liking. He has lots of money, but he's very arrogant and selfish. Once, we did a party to celebrate my great-granny's 99th birthday at my aunt's house. He got mad and kicked out all of us. We didn't even get to sing happy birthday. But luckily, he was on a business trip and we were alone. I always feel something off of him. Everything was good. My cousins and tried to return to the woods to continue investigating, but for some reason, we got the feeling that we weren't going to make it. So we decided to return and go to the cinema. When we got out, it was almost 10 p.m. I called my parents to let them know that I was still there and wasn't on my way. They said it's okay, but if I was returning home, better do it the next day, because it was really late. Me, as a very stubborn child, decided to still return that night and didn't obey. But first I needed to say goodbye to my aunt and go for some things I left there. At the time we arrived at the house, I only heard shouting from inside the house. One of my cousins covered my ears, but it was in vain. The husband, we call him Choby, was home. When he saw me there, he freaked out. He started yelling at me that I shouldn't be there, I wasn't family, etc. I explained to my aunt that I was taking my leave. She said the same thing my parents said, and I was about to agree until Choby interfered and said that I wasn't allowed to stay in this house for the night and that I should return home. I obeyed him because I fear Choby. There's something weird in him that really creeped me out. When me and my cousin were about to go out, Choby again interfered and said that I'm old enough to be by myself and ride a car. He didn't let any more of my cousins or my aunt come with me, and they fear him a lot. Yeah, maybe Choby gives you everything you need and maintains you. But for that, you need to obey him. If you don't, they're the consequences. So I packed my things and put them in the car. It was a short ride of about 2 hours. If I went now, I could arrive at 12 a.m. and surprise my parents because they still worried for me. So my aunt walked me to the car and apologised for the third time. I started to ride and everything was fine. I was slow because I'm still learning, but shortly before I had been on the road for an hour, it started to rain very hard. The truth is that I felt happy because my city was in a drought, so the rain was something miraculous. So I slowed a little bit more just to be cautious, but for some reason I got lost. I didn't know where I was anymore. I called my aunt, but nothing. My cousins, I even called Choby. I was really stressed because I was alone at night and lost. I calmed down and started to drive again. I found a motel in the middle of the road. It wasn't weird because, well, it was a well-used road some time of the year, but it should be open, so I went there. The place looked very run down, but it had a sign saying there were vacant rooms. I didn't hesitate and went inside, but for some reason, I felt really weird. I didn't care at that time. It was late, I was wet, and I wanted to sleep. I get inside, and there was a receptionist, a woman in her 50s. She looked at me weird, and after a talk, she told me she can't do anything. I can't have a room because I'm underage. But at that time, a guy like in his 20s came. He said he was the owner. Of course, it was a weird situation. He said that I can have a room and gave me a key with a really creepy smile. I take it and smile awkwardly. The receptionist was there with a really worried face. I was on my way to my room when I heard someone crying. I see in the distance a woman, but I felt that she wasn't normal. I ignored her. It's not that I go there and talk with ghosts, so I went to my room. But I couldn't sleep. Something was bothering me. Then I started to hear whispers. That's normal, to be honest. But I could still hear a voice saying, "Get out of here." That's when I decided to listen and went out. Went to the car and stayed there for a moment. Then I saw it. The owner trying to get inside my room with a key. When he entered and saw I wasn't there, he rushed outside and started to scream, heading to my car. I rapidly hid in the lower part. He peeked inside. The fear was killing me, and little by little, the tears began to roll out. I had to get out there as fast as possible. He didn't see me. Lucky me, I guess. I called my grandpa, a police chief. He said he'd do anything possible to save me, but I needed to get away from there. As soon as the owner left, I saw the golden opportunity to go and ride as fast as I could. But there was a problem. I left the keys in the room. I started to cry more when I heard tapping on the window. It was the receptionist. I thought I was going to die there. I thought it was the end. But then she showed me the keys and left them there. She helped me. She saved me. The owner started to return, screaming. I peeked, and he was really mad. He then cursed and saw the ghost woman in the pool. The man rushed there. I don't know if he was thinking it was me, but my opportunity to get the keys and run away was there or never. I did it. I turned on the car, and as soon as I did it, I see the man turning and start to run toward the car. I rushed and get out of there. 5 minutes in the road, a car was behind me at speed. It was my end, but I don't know, God. My grandpa and dad arrived with a police car, so they knew where I was. I saw the car passing beside me and returning where it came. I stopped the car and started crying out loud. That was the most terrific day ever. I arrived home and told them everything. Just like in the clown thing, my grandpa immediately investigated. After some weeks, the guy was arrested, and turns out he was a fugitive. He raped women and came to kill 2. I suspect that one of them was the crying woman. When I asked him about the receptionist, he told me that in there they just found the guy alive. He asked me then how did the woman look, and I gave a description. His face turned pale immediately. He showed me a picture, asking if that was the woman. I said yes, it was her, but looked more healthy in the pic and more happy. Turns out, she was the last victim. He killed her. She was dead.